during this demonstration, we're gonna focus on showing you the NX-OS Style CLI that's coming together with ACI release 1.2. So let me first start by giving you a perspective of how ACI actually can be seen as a giant switch. If we take a step back and look at what are the components that make up, for example, a Nexus 7000. You have your supervisor, your fabric cards, and your line cards. If we for a moment kind of double click on that and kind of expand the components, you see that inside the chassis you have your line cards. That's where all the servers connect to. Then you have some internal links that connect each line card. I'm just showing here example, but in reality all of them connected to the fabric modules. And then you have your supervisor, where all of the management plane is performed. And as we know, on a Nexus 7000 or any other Nexus device running in NX-OS mode, you have options on how you go and interact with the device, from a configuration perspective, from running commands to visualize, show commands. And a very popular way is certainly the NX-OS, the CLI. More recently, Cisco has been introducing APIs for also the devices running in standalone mode. And normally when you are operating through the CLI, you're gonna SSH into the device. Let's now take a parallel and look, how with ACI is actually very, very similar, or some may even say that the same way. So when we look at an ACI as a gigantic switch, actually the fabric cards are your spine switches on a leaf and spine topology. So the ACI spine switches can really be thought of as your fabric cards inside a switch, and then your line cards are actually your leaf switches. What is new now into NX-OS, into ACI release 1.2, is the fact that the APIC, so the application policy infrastructure controller that performs all of the policy and configuration management, now has support also for an NX-OS style CLI. So that's what this demonstration gonna focus on today, is to show you the NX-OS style CLI introduced into ACI release 1.2. So let's go ahead and connect to the lab. So let me go ahead here and connect to the lab. So first, actually here is just the graphical user interface. But what I'm gonna do is to come here and connect first. I'm just gonna SSH to our APIC. So for SSH to the APIC. Now, once you SSH into the APIC, you get into that prompt, and if you want to now go into the NX-OS style CLI, all you have to do is type exec sh. And as you can see here, we are now into a prompt that's very familiar. It's the NX-OS style CLI. If you do a show question mark, you can see the show commands that you have access to exactly the same way as you have on a Nexus device. So some of the commands here, most of the commands I should say, exactly the same. How do you do to check the software version that's running on a Nexus device? The same way you do here into the APIC. The difference here is when you do a show version, realize that we are actually really looking across the whole fabric. So that's where that point about being a gigantic switch. So show version, you see the name. In this case, in this fabric, we have 3 leaf switches, 101, 102, 103, 2 spine switches, 3 APIC controllers, and I can straight away see that, you know, what's the version that they are running, 1.2, and on the switches 11.2. Now, as you probably know, in ACI we separate the fabric. We create tenants, where within the tenants then you create application network profiles and then endpoint groups. So if I would want to see the configuration of a tenant, I can show running exactly the same way as you do on a next switch. If I partially type the command and I do tab, it will autocomplete exactly the same way as on a Nexus switch. And then tenant, and then I can even do a question mark here and it will tell me what are the tenants that already exist on this fabric. Let's take here as an example tenant called TNT 14. If I do a show running into that tenant, you can see here that it show me here all of that configuration. So there is a VRF, a VRF with called tenant 14. In our case, we've been using that, you know, for some testing. So there is some root profiles. There is an application network profile called tenant 14 AP1. Within that application network profile, you see the endpoint groups. So endpoint group 1, TNT 14, access application profile 1, app EPG, what's the bridge domain associated, what's the contract that consumes and provides association with the VMM domain, and so on, right? So you can hopefully see how the configuration, the full configuration of the tenant is demonstrated here in a very, very intuitive way. But now let's look at a few other things where we start seeing some additional value by having that centralized controller that's actually operating this gigantic switch. So let's say that someone calls you as the network operator and say, hey, I'm having problems with an endpoint, that a server that has IP 10.1.4.101. In the traditional networking, where you are managing all the switches individually, you'd probably have to go to your layer 2, layer 3 aggregation boundary, do a show IP with the IP, figure out the MAC address, do a show MAC address, what is the trunk, what is the port that MAC is going to, go to the next switch, and then, you know, show MAC address, identify. So you kind of, you know, gonna have to touch several points until you can actually identify where a particular server connects into the fabric. Here, because we this is a centralized, you know, management perspective, I can just come here from the central point, show endpoints, and then let's, for example, grab for 10.1.4.101. That's the IP address that we've been given. Immediately we see that, okay, I have that same IP address because ACI supports overlapping IP addresses within the tenants. I have that endpoint 10.1.4.101 as part of tenant 14, as part of application profile tenant 14 AP1. Here is my IP, here's my MAC address, here is the switch where it's connected to, so leaf 103, and then here is the port. So immediately I went, you know, with a single command, without knowing where the endpoint is connected, to the precise location where it is. We're thinking of this, you know, certainly powerful to help with the troubleshooting. Let's now look a little bit deeper into a particular endpoint group. So let's say that you want more details about particular endpoint group into tenant 14. So show tenant, you can question mark, and then it will give you the choice here. So tenant 14, application profile, we have several configured here. We're gonna take application profile 1. Within that, you can then choose the EPGs, the endpoints. So what are the endpoints that we have within that? Let's take the web and let's look into the details of that endpoint group. So that command is giving us here what is the tenant, the application profile, what's the EPG that we are looking at, the bridge domain that's associated, what are the domains that's associated with, provided and consumed contracts, any VMM domain, so it's associated with VMware vCenter in this case. If there are any static bindings, so we know that this EPG is statically binded to those leaf switches and those interfaces. And also show me here what are the endpoints that have been dynamically learned. So I know that as part of that EPG, all of those endpoints here, they are what they are and where they are connected to. So the node, the interface, and even the VLAN that's used, towards outside the fabric. So very, very powerful here to get a lot of information, get all the information, including even who is connected to a particular endpoint. So the other thing that is usually common is between endpoint groups, we have an ACI, we control the rules of how endpoint groups communicate through contracts. So let's imagine that you would like to see what is actually configured into that contract called allow RDP. So very simple, show running, it's part of a particular tenant, so tenant TNT 14. Oops. Best way is to question mark, you get the name here, tenant 14, and then I can say contract, and then it will give me the choice, the options for the contract. So allow RDP, and then you tell me that within tenant 14 contract allow RDP, what is the subject, so one level more, and then what is actually the rule set, what is actually into that contract. So in our case here, we allow TCP into both directions. The other thing that I like to show here is you can also from the controller go into a particular leaf switch to make checks, to look at things like what's the interface status. So let's do fabric and then do a question mark. You see here the number of the leaf, the identifier of the leaf. You also have the name here. So let's say that you want to go to leaf switch 101. So do fabric 101. It now gets us into the fabric configuration mode, or fabric exec mode, I should say. Now you are connected to that switch, and then you can run commands that should look very familiar. Show interface brief to look at what is the interface, what's their mode, what's the status, and also the speed, and then if there is no SFP, or in this case there are, so 1 and 2 is up, 4 is down, and SFP is missing. So exactly the same command that you run into a Nexus 7000, for example, a switch, or any other Nexus switch. So want to see the counters, so show interface 101, you have exactly the same counters that we are all familiar with. Same thing, if I want to show even a port channel, So I can look at what are the port channels that exist on that particular leaf switch. So hopefully that gave you an idea that with the APIC version 1.2 NX-OS Style CLI, you really have here the look and the feel as if you were on a Nexus switch that's not in ACI mode. Really help, you know, the operation to have a very limited, you know, need for retraining and for learning. But what's also interesting is this is not only about show commands, you can actually make configurations as well. So let me first just open the GUI here so that you can see that we are actually make the configuration change through the NX-OS Style CLI, and it's making the change through into the system, and because the GUI, the CLI is all accessing the same object model, there is no difference. Everything is reflected here into real time. So first, let me go here into tenants. You see the tenants that previously existed. I'm gonna go ahead and through the CLI, and I'll keep the GUI open here so that we can see as things happen. So let me go ahead and create a new tenant. So configure tenant. Let's call this test config, the name of the tenant. So immediately, see, as we created the tenant called test config, that's also created here. It is actually created into the system, just reflected into the GUI. So I'm now gonna create here an application. Let me go here into the GUI, into that particular tenant, and you see that at the moment I don't have any application profiles. Let me go ahead here and create an application profile called test.app example. You see that that's immediately reflected on the GUI as well. So EPG, let me create a EPG2, should also, if we expand here, should also be created. So same, can create a bridge domain, BD2, this will be consistent, exit that. I can then go ahead and create a VRF as well. So if I go actually, or even associate a VRF with the bridge domain that we have created. So VRF member, and then give a VRF name, VRF1. Can go ahead and create a VRF here. So VRF1 and exit. So as you can see here, I was able to configure a new tenant, a new application profile, an EPG with very simple commands, and everything that we did is actually, you know, programmed on the fabric. And if I would go here, you see that, you know, our bridge domain 2 is created, our VRF1 is created. So the NX-OS CLI is used also for making configuration changes. Also, a very common way for in the networking teams, you know, sometimes to apply configurations is by working on some of those configs offline, and then, you know, copy and paste into a switch. And exactly the same mode is also supported here with NX-OS Style CLI on the APIC. So for example, I had created that config file called test config. What we're doing here is going to that app, test app application network profile, and creating a new EPG. You see here that at the moment we only have EPG2. I'm creating an EPG called EPG3, and then also a new bridge domain and associated with the same VRF. If I would come here copy that, I can come here into the CLI of the APIC, paste, immediately the configuration change is actually reflected. So a new bridge domain, a new EPGs. So hopefully that gave you an idea of what we have introduced into one of the capabilities that we introduced with APIC version 1.2, what we call NX-OS Style CLI. Thanks for watching.